Hello, my name is Nick Tucker, and today for my artifact presentation for Humanities 302 with Professor Phillips, I'm going to be doing something that I'm really passionate about and that I love a lot, and that is the history of metal music. So, to start off, I'm going to explain where the symbol for rock and metal came from. That's this one, like that. A lot of people call it the devil horns, but it was actually started by Ronnie James Dio, also known as Dio. He was the lead singer for Black Sabbath after Ozzy Osbourne left the band. Ronnie's grandma used to do it all the time when he was younger, and it was to ward off the evil eye. And he liked that whole concept, so he would do that to try and ward off any evil spirits or anything. And that's just kind of how it caught on. He used to just do it on stage, and then he would do it at the end of his sets. So we're gonna start at the very beginning when metal kind of began. The birth of metal, a lot of people credit Jimi Hendrix mostly for starting the whole movement of metal. He played heavier, more fast-paced guitars than people were used to in regular rock music. Bands like Cream did the same thing. They also used more heavier, fast-paced drums and bass lines that went along with the faster-paced, heavier guitars. So that's kind of just how it all began. Now, moving into the 1970s, this is when metal really started to take off. Bands like Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, and Deep Purple. Again, if you look over to the left or to the right of each one, I put a song or two that people would know, or songs that are my favorite by these bands. These bands really started to mold and shape what modern metal is today. They started adding power chords, what some would consider mystical lyrics, drum solos, guitar solos, and more relaxed vocals, as opposed to a different way that metal also went during the 1970s. But these are just ways that metal really changed during this time. Also during the 1970s, there was another group of bands that went a different way with their metal. Alice Cooper, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Judas Priest, and Kiss. They were more of a grungy rock sound, a little bit louder than Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and all them. They had a lot heavier instruments rather than the mystical, relaxed atmosphere that was given with all the other bands during the 1970s. At the end of the 1970s, bands like Def Leppard, Van Halen, and Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden came along and kind of added along to it and changed a lot. Obviously, you probably know Def Leppard. Drummer only had one arm after getting in a car accident. Just a little fun fact, I guess. Alright, so 1980s, this is my personal favorite time of music in rock and metal history. Bands like Metallica, Megadeth, who I've seen live, Motley Crue, Pantera, Anthrax, and Slayer really started to change the sound by making it a lot heavier and a lot more grungy. So, they went with a lot heavier than in the 90s, or than in the 70s. They went significantly heavier, louder, and a lot of bands like Metallica and Megadeth went with what is considered to be a low and slow kind of vibe. Slayer started thrash metal. They're the kings of thrash metal. They started it. That's just really, really fast, heavy guitar. Anthrax, same thing. Pantera, same thing. Bands like Motley Crue, Megadeth, and Metallica went with really, really heavy vocals and just the low and slow, as opposed to thrash metal where it's more fast-paced and aggressive. Now, on to the 1990s. This genre really emerged in the 1990s. It was more of a punk. Bands like Green Day, Linkin Park, these were bands, in Nirvana. These were bands that got really big during this time, and they started the punk movement. And this was the rebellious, angry, and kind of angsty sounding music with whinier vocals, as opposed to really that grungy sound. Bands like Linkin Park kind of did a little bit of both. They had some screaming in it, but this is where the whole culture of metal music really is known for and became really, really popular. That's the big baggy jeans, band tees, ripped jeans, earrings, bracelets, jewelry, stuff like that. That became really big. Also during this time, bands like Tool, A Perfect Circle, Lamb of God, Disturbed, they kind of went with the more classic metal sound with the screams and growls and really, really heavy instruments, as opposed to the punk movement, which was more just kind of screams, but also just a really whiny aspect to it. Now, onto my personal favorite of all metal is the metalcore era of the 2000s. These are bands like As I Lay Dying, Haste the Day, The Devil Wears Prada, and Memphis Mayfire, all of who I've seen live, and I loved every second of it. These are actually all Christian bands, and I just absolutely love this era. This is what some people call, quote unquote, screamo music. This is when it switches back and forth from clean vocals, which is like more high-pitched singing, and then switches right back over to a scream or a growl for a breakdown, and it goes from really heavy to really light really quickly. And that's just kind of where I find myself often listening. So there's my works cited. Thank you for listening.